How inmates are transferred to Pelican Bay inside California's most extreme prison pipeline. Part 1. The Last Ride. At exactly 3:17 a.m., a white transport bus rolls through the fog of Northern California. No markings, no windows you can see through, just steel locks and silence. Inside that bus, every man is shackled at the ankles, chains cut into skin with each bump in the road, hands cuffed, waist belted with iron restraints designed not for comfort, but control. No one speaks, because everyone on that bus knows the destination. Pelican Bay State Prison. A place so isolated it disappears into forest. A prison so severe it doesn't just hold men, it erases them. But the real story doesn't begin at Pelican Bay. It begins weeks earlier, with a knock on a cell door, and a word that changes everything. Pack up. The pipeline no one sees. When people think of prison transfers, they imagine paperwork, court orders, a simple move from one facility to another. But the transfer to Pelican Bay is not administrative. It is ritualistic. It is punitive. And for many inmates, it is a final step in a system designed to break the most dangerous or most defiant men in California's prison population. This is not a story about one prison. This is the story of a pipeline, a carefully engineered process that begins inside lower-level yards, wins through classification committees, transport units, isolation holding cells, and ends in one of the most extreme environments ever created by the American correctional system. Today, we're taking you inside that pipeline, from the moment an inmate is marked to the moment the cell door closes behind them at Pelican Bay. And once that door shuts, very few ever come back the same. The mark. No inmate wakes up one morning and volunteers for Pelican Bay. Transfers are triggered, sometimes by violence, sometimes by association, sometimes by nothing more than suspicion. Inside California prisons, every inmate lives under constant observation, not just by guards, but by intelligence officers whose sole job is to track influence, loyalty, and threat potential. They are known as institutional gang investigators, IGIs, and once your name appears in their reports, the clock starts ticking. The file, it starts quietly, a confidential memo, a notation in a digital file, a pattern of behavior that raises concerns, talking to the wrong people, being present during the wrong incident, possessing artwork, books, symbols, or handwritten notes that suggest gang affiliation. At this stage, no one tells the inmate anything. They continue daily routines, yard time, meals count, unaware that their fate is being discussed behind closed doors. But in California's system, classification committees don't need certainty. They need probability. The committee, once a case reaches committee, it enters a world with no jury and no defense attorney. A room filled with administrators, security captains, classification officers. Each file represents a potential risk. And Pelican Bay exists for one reason: to remove risk from the rest of the system. If an inmate is deemed influential, or disruptive, or simply uncontrollable, Pelican Bay becomes the solution. No appeal that matters. In theory, inmates can challenge their classification. In reality, the process is already over. By the time the inmate is notified, the decision has been made, approved, and scheduled. All that remains is execution, not of a sentence, but of a transfer. Pack it up. The notification never comes with warning. It comes early, usually before dawn. A correctional officer stops at the cell. No explanation, no timeline, just 2 words. Pack it up. 10 minutes. Inmates are typically given 10 minutes. 10 minutes to gather what little they're allowed to bring. Most personal property stays behind. Photos, letters, legal paperwork, anything considered excess or dangerous gets boxed and stored or discarded. This is intentional, because the transfer of Pelican Bay is designed to strip inmates not just of movement, but of identity. The shackling, before leaving the housing unit. Restraints are applied, ankle shackles first, then waist chain, then handcuffs lock the belt. Movement becomes slow, painful, and deliberate. Every step reminds the inmate of exactly how little control they have left. For some, This is the first time they realize this isn't temporary. The holding cells before the road north. Inmates are placed in administrative holding. Concrete rooms, no windows, bright lights that never fully turn off. Sometimes they wait hours, sometimes days. This is where rumors spread, whispers through vents, shouts through walls. Everyone asks the same question, where you headed? And when the answer comes, Pelican Bay, the room goes quiet. Why the silence matters? Because within California's prison culture, Pelican Bay is not just another facility. It is a warning, a place designed for men the system believes cannot coexist with others. The message is clear. If you end up there, you are considered irreversible. The transport night. Transfers to Pelican Bay almost always happen at night. Less visibility, fewer witnesses, more control. The buses arrive unmarked. Inmates are counted, searched, counted again. Every chain is checked twice. No windows open. No communication between inmates. The bus pulls away, and with it, any remaining sense of familiarity. The route. The journey can take 10 to 14 hours. From Southern California, through the Central Valley, into the remote forests near the Oregon border. Phones are confiscated from guards. Radio silence is enforced. This is not transportation. It is extraction, the point of no return. By the time the bus climbs into the fog-covered hills near Crescent City, most inmates already understand something terrifying. This transfer was never about rehabilitation. It was about removal. And once Pelican Bay appears through the mist, there is no undoing what comes next. Part 2, the gate that swallows you. Arrival at the edge of America. By the time the transport bus slows, most inmates already feel it. The air changes first. Colder, heavier, salted with the smell of the Pacific Ocean and wet pine trees. Pelican Bay State Prison sits near the absolute northern edge of California, so remote that even longtime residents of the state struggle to locate it on a map. Dense forest on one side, open ocean on the other. Isolation is not accidental here. It is strategic. The first sight, the bus turns onto a narrow road, and then concrete rises out of the fog. High walls, guard towers, razor wire layered so thick it looks almost organic, like something grown rather than built. No welcoming signage, no sense of arrival, just a fortified complex that feels less like a prison and more like a military installation. This is where California sends the inmates it cannot or will not manage anywhere else. The final count. Before anyone steps off the bus, the counts begin. Every inmate is called by number, every chain inspected, every movement controlled. Guards don't shout here. They don't need to. Pelican Bay runs on quiet authority. A nod, a hand signal, a command spoken once, and obeyed immediately. Those who hesitate learn quickly. No human contact. Inmates exit one at a time. Always spaced. Always separated. No eye contact with other prisoners. No communication. The goal is simple. Break continuity. Whatever alliances, rivalries, or identities existed before, they end here. Intake. The strip. The intake building is cold. Not just in temperature, but in design. Bare concrete. Stainless steel benches bolted to the floor. Cameras in every corner. This is where Pelican Bay introduces itself. The strip search. Restraints come off. Clothes come off next. Every inmate is subjected to a full visual search. Arms raised. Feet spread. Mouth open. Hair lifted. No privacy. No dignity. The message is immediate and unmistakable. You arrive here with nothing, and you leave with even less. The documentation. Fingerprints are taken. Photos snapped. Not for identification, but for records. Pelican Bay maintains meticulous documentation. Every scar, every tattoo, every mark that could indicate affiliation or status. In this system, the body itself becomes evidence. Orientation cells. After intake, inmates expect a briefing, rules, schedules, some explanation of what comes next. Instead, They are led into single-man cells known as orientation housing. This is not general population. This is decompression, or, depending on who you ask, psychological conditioning. The cell, 6 by 10 feet, concrete slab bed, toilet sink combo welded into the wall. No windows. The door is solid steel with narrow slot at eye level. When it closes, the sound is final, a heavy, echoing slam that reverberates through the chest. For many inmates, this is the moment it hits. They are completely alone. The silence. Pelican Bay is loud in theory. Hundreds of inmates, endless metal doors, constant surveillance. But inside these cells, there's a unique silence. Not peaceful, oppressive, a silence that presses inward. The rules you aren't told. No one explains Pelican Bay to you. There is no handbook handed over during intake, because here, rules are learned through consequence. Movement. Inmates are allowed out of their cells only when instructed, hands cuffed behind the back, escorted by armed officers. Any delay in compliance is documented. Any perceived defiance escalates quickly. This is not a place that negotiates. Communication. Talking is allowed but discouraged. Shouting through doors attracts attention. Attention attracts scrutiny, and scrutiny here has consequences that follow inmates for years. So most learn to stay quiet, to exist without being noticed. The real purpose of Pelican Bay. Officially, Pelican Bay exists to manage high-risk inmates. Unofficially, it serves another function, containment of influence. Many inmates sent here are not just violent. They are organizers, leaders, men with reputations strong enough to shape behavior across entire yards. Pelican Bay isolates them, cuts communication lines, removes them from the social ecosystem of California prisons. This is not about punishment alone. It is about neutralization. The wait. Orientation can last days, weeks, sometimes months. No timeline is given. Inmates wait. They replay their transfer in their minds. The committee decision, the bus ride, the intake, trying to understand how they ended up here, and more importantly, how long they will stay. The question that never leaves. Every inmate asks the same question in the dark. Is this permanent? Pelican Bay never answers. Beyond transfer, by the time orientation ends, something has already changed. Not physically, mentally, because Pelican Bay isn't just a destination. It's a system designed to reshape behavior through isolation, predictability, and control. Into years inside California's most extreme prison. Part 3. The box with no edges. Security Housing Unit, SHU. When inmates hear the word Security Housing Unit, SHU, they understand what it means. Not confinement, not discipline, disappearance. Pelican Bay's SHU is not a wing of the prison. It is the prison. What the SHU really is. Built in the late 1980s, Pelican Bay's SHU was designed around a single principle: total control through isolation. No shared cells, no communal spaces, no casual human interaction. Every movement is regulated, every sound monitored, every moment accounted for. This is where inmates sent through the pipeline ultimately arrive. Not because they committed a new crime, but because the system believes they might. The cell you never leave. The SHU cell is functionally identical to orientation housing, but psychologically different, because here, there is no expectation of movement, no promise of reassessment, just time. The design, 8 by 10 feet, concrete walls sealed with industrial epoxy, a poured concrete bed, a toilet sink unit controlled by staff. The light never fully turns off. There is no mirror, because reflection, literal or emotional, is not encouraged here. The door, solid steel. A narrow perforated slot allows guards to see inside, but prevents inmates from seeing out. It's a one-way relationship. Observation without connection. The yard without a sky. SHU inmates are allowed exercise. Technically, what Pelican Bay calls a yard is more accurately described as a concrete pen. The dog run, 20 by 30 feet. High concrete walls. Steel mesh overhead. No grass. No equipment, just exposed sky, fragmented by wire. Inmates call it the dog run, not because of its size, but because of how it makes them feel. One at a time. Exercise is solitary. No group movement. No interaction. An inmate is escorted cuffed to the yard. The door closes. And for 90 minutes, this is the only world that exists. Some pace. Some stand still. Some stare upward. Try to remember what open space feels like. Time is a weapon. The most powerful tool at Pelican Bay is not force. It is duration. The days. Meals slide through slots. Counts happen on schedule. Lights follow a rigid cycle. Days blur together until time loses meaning. Without markers. No work. No programs. No human conversation. The brain begins to turn inward. The years. Some inmates remain in SHU for years. 5, 10, even longer. Not serving a sentence, but existing in administrative limbo. Their release from isolation depends on a single thing: classification review. And that review is built on behavior observed almost entirely in isolation. The paradox. Pelican Bay presents a paradox. Inmates are isolated to prevent influence, yet expected to demonstrate social stability to be released. They must show compliance without opportunity. They must show rehabilitation without programming. It's a closed loop, and once inside, many find it impossible to escape. Debriefing. There is one documented path out of the SHU, and it carries a cost. What debriefing means. Debriefing is a process by which an inmate provides information to prison authorities, typically about gang affiliation or activity, names, structures, operations. In exchange, the inmate may be reclassified, removed from SHU, returned to a lower security facility. Why few choose it? Debriefing doesn't just affect classification. It affects survival. Information travels. Reputations follow. Even after transfer, the label remains. For many inmates, the risk of debriefing outweighs the isolation. So they stay, year after year. The psychological shift. Extended isolation changes behavior, not always dramatically. Sometimes subtly. Routine becomes ritual. Silence becomes safety. Minimal movement feels normal. The world beyond the cell begins to feel distant, abstract. And that is perhaps Pelican Bay's most profound effect. It doesn't just confine bodies. It reshapes minds. Why the pipeline never stops. While inmates endure years inside the SHU, the pipeline continues. Classification committees meet. Transport buses roll at night. New inmates arrive. Pelican Bay never fills because it is designed to cycle people through isolation, not resolve them. It is a system without an endpoint. The long quiet. By the time an inmate understands Pelican Bay, it is already too late. The routines are ingrained. The silence is familiar. The outside world feels unreal. Part 4, when the silence broke. The first cracks. For decades, Pelican Bay operated in relative obscurity. Remote, restricted, shielded from public scrutiny by geography and bureaucracy. Inside, the SHU functioned exactly as designed. Outside, few people paid attention, until inmates found a way to be heard, without speaking. The hunger strikes. In July of 2011, something unprecedented happened. Inmates inside Pelican Bay's SHU stopped eating. Not one or two, hundreds. And within days, the protest spread across California's prison system. Why hunger? Hunger was not chosen for symbolism. It was chosen for leverage. Inmates in isolation have almost nothing they can control, but they can refuse food. And when enough bodies do that at once, the system is forced to respond. The demands were simple and radical. An end to indefinite solitary confinement. Meaningful pathways out of the SHU. Basic human contact. Access to programming. Not luxury. Not release. Just an acknowledgement that time in isolation should not be endless. The state responds. California officials were caught off guard. Pelican Bay was designed to contain disruption, not generate it. Medical staff were deployed, court filings prepared, public statements carefully worded. The hunger strike was framed as manipulation, a coordinated effort by dangerous individuals. But the images told a different story. Men losing weight, lying still in concrete cells, choosing physical deterioration over psychological erasure, national attention. Once the media arrived, Pelican Bay could no longer remain invisible. Journalists began asking questions. How long were inmates held in isolation? What criteria justified it? What oversight existed? For the first time, the pipeline was exposed, not as a rumor, but as policy. The lawsuits, civil rights organizations stepped in. Former inmates testified. Psychologists submitted reports describing long-term isolation as psychologically damaging. Federal courts began examining practices that had operated unchecked for decades. The question was no longer whether Pelican Bay was extreme. The question was whether it was constitutional. The core argument. The argument was not that Pelican Bay housed dangerous inmates. That was never disputed. The argument was that indefinite isolation, without clear timelines, meaningful review, or rehabilitative purpose, crossed the line. Settlement and shift. In 2015, California reached a settlement. Indefinite SHU confinement based solely on gang affiliation would end. Thousands of inmates were reclassified. Some released into general population. Some transferred to other facilities. Pelican Bay changed. On paper. What actually changed? The SHU didn't disappear. It evolved, renamed, restructured, reframed. New units emphasized step-down programs. Gradual reintroduction to social interaction. But the core environment, concrete, isolation, control, remained intact. The pipeline adapts. Systems do not dismantle themselves. They adapt. While criteria shifted, the pipeline continued. Inmates still marked as disruptive, still transferred north, still subjected to extreme control. Pelican Bay no longer stood alone, but it remained the model, the long shadow. Former inmates described lingering effects, difficulty with crowds, discomfort with conversation, a preference for isolation. Pelican Bay doesn't end at the gate. It follows people out, into other prisons, into society, into silence. Why Pelican Bay still matters. Today, Pelican Bay is often cited in debates over solitary confinement, not as an anomaly, but as a warning. A reminder of what happens when control becomes a primary goal of incarceration, and when systems built for safety begin operating without limits. After the storm, the hunger strikes forced change. The lawsuits created oversight, but the pipeline remains. And for inmates still marked, still classified, still transferred, Pelican Bay is not history. It is present tense, the place that never lets go. Pelican Bay was never just a prison. It was an idea that some people are too dangerous to exist anywhere else, an idea that isolation can replace understanding, an idea that control is the same thing as safety. And once that idea was built into concrete and steel, it created a pipeline, quiet, efficient, and largely invisible. A pipeline that begins with a file, moves through classification rooms and midnight buses, and ends behind a door that closes without a timeline. For the men sent there, Pelican Bay is not measured in days or years. It is measured in silence, in routines that never change, in a sky seen only through wire, in the slow realization that the hardest part of confinement is not the walls. It's what happens to the mind when the world disappears. Some inmates eventually leave Pelican Bay, but many say Pelican Bay never leaves them. And that raises a question that still has no clear answer. At what point does containment become something else entirely? If this documentary gave you a deeper understanding of how the system really works, if it challenged what you thought you knew about prison, punishment, and control, take a moment to like this video. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Share it with someone who believes incarceration is simple, because nothing about this pipeline is. And if you want more in-depth cinematic investigations into the darkest corners of the justice system, subscribe to the channel. Because there are more stories buried behind concrete and steel, and silence only protects them if we stop listening.